truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, June 20th, 2024, the 1,247th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at I'mYourModerator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will receive the ad-free experience, be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you will be invited to the interactive live streams every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't do a paid subscription or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so I want to start the show out today with an article from the far-left rag The Nation that came out on May 17th, 2024. I commented on this article a few days later on Telegram and Truth Social, because I believe that this was describing the sort of thing we would see if I was correct in my analysis that the narrative play right now is to accept a Trump victory, prepare to steal races on behalf of the uniparty down ballot, preserve the election fraud system in place, everyone just going back to sleep believing that Donald Trump had won, therefore the system must have worked. They would steal elections for senators and congressmen. They would steal state offices, and they would steal right down to local offices in as many places as they can to fully subvert Donald Trump's next term as president. I have said many times that if elections are not legitimate, if they're not free and fair, safe and secure, if we can't rely on them to accurately reflect the will and intent of the American voter, then what we have is a battle of narratives and whether or not the public is prepared to accept the people declared the winners of these elections. And for that, you don't need to convince them that the declared winner actually won and was actually more popular and more people actually voted for him. You just need to make it minimally plausible so that they will have an excuse. They will have a justification that they can tell other people as to why the reported winner could have actually won, and regardless, we'll never know, so nothing should be done. And with that, they're off the hook. That's what the narrative must provide in order to be able to successfully rig and steal an election. So if elections cannot be expected to be decided by real, lawful American votes, properly counted, etc., then an election is nothing more than a battle of narratives. But also, if the votes are real, lawful, and American, and the totals are properly counted, the elections are held lawfully, everything goes off without a hitch, then they are also still only a battle of narratives, because the result that you would get legitimately in a popularity contest is entirely based on who's more popular, which is, ding, 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 a battle of narratives. And I don't want to spend too long on this, but you might say, well, it's also a battle of personalities, right? And I'd say, okay, how do you assess the personalities of the strangers on TV? I used to think Donald Trump had a terrible personality. Now I find him bold, competent, honest, and funny as hell. Why? Won a narrative battle. But isn't it also about what he did in office? Well, yep, okay. How do you assess what he did in office? Again, a narrative battle. It is always, only ever a battle of narratives. It's a popularity contest. So if you have a battle of narratives and you are losing that battle of narratives across the board, if all of the places that you have traditionally held a narrative advantage, if on all those points things are reversed on you and all of a sudden you're losing there as well, well, then you need to create new narratives to support your own plausibility as the winner of the popularity contest. The central narrative has accepted, and people by and large understand, that black men have left Joe Biden, that Hispanic men and women have left Joe Biden, that labor unions and workers and the middle and lower middle class have left Democrats and Joe Biden. All of these people are headed toward MAGA, as are young voters. And you're probably getting anti-war voters and anti-vax voters coming toward Trump as well. So people whose traditional demographic descriptions should be favoring the Democrat candidate are no longer doing that. And virtually everyone who pays attention to political news knows that. So if you're the uniparty and you're trying to figure out narratives that will support election theft down ballot, you have to find some new avenues. You're going to have to pitch a bunch of narrative deployments and see if you can get any of them to catch on. And that's exactly what I highlighted about 4 weeks ago. This article in The Nation is all about how Democrats are making a play for rural voters. And this is after about 9 years of hearing about how Donald Trump appeals most to rural white America. This is like a few months ago when everyone was considering Mike Johnson's package and Donald Trump said he didn't like the immigration piece. And then all of a sudden, the uniparty and its media attempted to describe Donald Trump as responsible for the immigration problem that they had been covering up for the last 3 years and were now making the biggest issue in the country. They spent 9 years tying Donald Trump's identity to xenophobia, to build the wall, the travel ban, the kids in cages. Trump hates brown people. Oh, but now here it is. It's an election in 2024, and Donald Trump is actually the problem with immigration. That's never going to work. You can't sell that. And you can't sell the idea that somehow rural white America is going to flip to Joe Biden. But the leftists at the nation decided to try. And I just want to say one other thing before we get into the article. A lot of people, normies in particular, but some extremely pragmatic truthers may be this way as well. They don't like to speculate a whole lot. In fact, sometimes they think that speculating is irresponsible, or they're concerned that speculation is going to make them look or seem wrong a lot. But I totally disagree with that stance. I think speculation is absolutely critical for a few reasons. And I'm not the only person who thinks this way, by the way. People in, say, venture capital make quite a bit of money for being able to figure out what might be coming in the future, considering a set of possibilities, figuring out what the pros and the cons are, what the likelihood is, and then assessing things on that basis, rather than waiting for an authoritative source to tell you what happened and then you spending all your time figuring out what your opinion of it is. The purpose of all of this is not to be right about the news. The purpose of this is that we are in the middle of an information war, and we have a government that is actively trying to depopulate and impoverish us, and they are most successful, and maybe can only be successful, if everyone believes what they're saying and is unprepared to respond to what they're doing. We want to consider what might be happening in the future so that when new information comes in, it can map onto a different range of understandings rather than just appear as random, isolated information that just goes on the meaningless pile with everything else. But the other thing is this. In an information war where the enemy is trying to convince a mass of people that something clearly false is true and then cause a reaction from those people, when something happens in the future, the way to thwart that tactic is for people to understand that the thing they're seeing is not natural, it's not random, this is not an organic event. The process to achieve this manipulation, all of the underlying information that supports this lie, all of that is totally visible, and the regime reaction to this event is exactly what you would expect if they were trying to achieve the goal that all of these other narrative steps would naturally lead to. Now, again, to pull this off, it needs to be sold far and wide. The people need to believe it and accept it. And that becomes extremely unlikely if the people already expected the event being framed as normal and natural and organic to arrive. This causes people to reject the framing and ultimately reject the narrative and, in the process, reject the people disseminating that narrative, knowing they can no longer trust those people. I imagine all of you are very familiar with how this works and have observed it happening many times. If you want to accelerate the process, you need to cut off as many outs as possible to expose them to the maximum degree and make them change tactics as many times as possible. This is certainly the process that has been used against us for decades. It works a whole lot better, by the way, when you have control over all of the elements of power within the system. If you're going to censor people on social media or arc inside a whistleblower or wage lawfare against anyone who contests an election, it's going to be a whole lot easier to pull off your narrative deployments. But you can't do that at all anymore when you lose control over the means of information and the people have lost trust in those who are disseminating it for you. And so what you're able to do at that point is introduce chaos and cause their narrative deployments to fail. They will have to change tactics. They will have to be more extreme about their tactics, which makes it easier for everyone to observe. And if you do it well enough, you disarm the narrative bomb completely and they move on to different tactics. When you've thoroughly considered all the plausible possibilities, you can position yourself to be able to respond well to any of them, whichever one might occur. Think about it like a surprise party, right? And I'm not suggesting that we should want to ruin people's surprise parties, but when someone's throwing a surprise party and they invite guests, they tell the guests, hey, this is a surprise party. Please don't tell James that you'll see him at his birthday party because he doesn't know that he's having a birthday party. And if you tell him that, you're gonna ruin the surprise. If you ruin the surprise, then it's not actually a surprise party at all. It's just a party, and James has to pretend that no one told him. But the point is that information changes the future reality. The mission is disrupt enemy plans in an information war, because the disruption of plans changes the future reality. And that can be done simply by transmitting the right information about what the future might entail. So let's have a look at this article from The Nation. The headline is, "It's not too late for Democrats to win back rural voters." After 3 decades of increasingly steep losses in rural America, Democrats are finally beginning to grapple with an inconvenient truth. An enduring Democrat majority requires winning back some portion of persuadable rural working class voters. Well, you don't have an enduring majority. In fact, you have no majority at all. But as we discussed the other day, James Clyburn's operation to steal the vote of Black America is very effective. The narrative ability there is dying. It's not dead, but it's dying. They might be able to get one more cycle out of that. But regardless, they need to neutralize it. The narrative on one side will be the black vote is shifting to Donald Trump. And in response, they'll say, okay, yes, it shifted a few points, but the Democrats were able to make up for that with rural voters. And that narrative pairing will never be seen on the same show that also says union workers went in Trump's direction. That'll be on a different show where the response is, yes, but the Democrats made up for it with rural voters. And then, of course, remember, we're talking about the uniparty here. All they need is uniparty candidates, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter, just uniparty. If they catch on with one of these explanations, like that rural voters shifted toward Democrats, they will use it in every possible example. It's the same as when they say that red states are turning purple because all of the people are moving in from California. And by the way, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm one of those people. But it can't just keep happening at unlimited numbers forever. And the statistics, to the extent that they are meaningful at all, and they may not be, but to the extent they are, they don't support that narrative anyhow. It doesn't matter. It makes sense to people. It is convincing to people. Therefore, if the conversation has no complexity, it works as something you say, and somebody just says, oh, yeah, huh. Yeah, I guess that's true. Maybe I should think about that. And by the time they think about it again, it will never, ever matter. Liars know that. That's why lying works. Both Republicans and Democrats' neoliberal economic policies have been harmful, in some instances ruinous, to rural communities. Does anyone believe that about Donald Trump? And I'm not saying, can this commie supply me some statistics to support his argument? I'm saying, does anyone believe that? And no, of course, no one believes that. The framing here is incredible. Both Republicans and Democrats' neoliberal economic policies have been harmful. So it's not the far left's policies that no one's going to try enough of, according to them, all the time, forever. And when they say Republicans, that groups MAGA in as well. They say neoliberal because that means the left, but not them. I remember the Bernie Sanders people in 2015 and 2016 in Hollywood constantly complaining about neoliberals. They believe they are fully separate from neoliberals while supporting the exact same global agenda. Well, let's continue. The GOP on the whole has caused more economic pain, but it has also been the party that has acknowledged rural struggles and put people who've been harmed at the center of their rhetoric. None more so than Donald Trump, who said in 2016, Every time you see a closed factory or wiped out community in Ohio, it was essentially caused by the Clintons. And the writer from The Nation, of course, has already accepted this as true. It's just also that Donald Trump's not going to help them, no matter how much he says he is, and no matter how much he actually does help them. There's only one person out there with an agenda to re-onshore American manufacturing. And only one leader who's trying to have America supply the world with many things that it needs so that America can become wealthy again and become great again based on American productivity and innovation, knowing that this country has vast resources and incredible people. And of course, these overeducated shitlibs have probably never spent any time living in rural America. So how the hell would they know? Rural America is just a set of surveys and statistics to them. Too many Democrats, meanwhile, have sounded either dismissive or exasperated by rural people. In 2016, Chuck Schumer's catastrophically cavalier strategy willfully sacrificed blue-collar rural voters in exchange, or so he'd hoped, for high-income suburbanites. As far as the Democrat establishment was concerned, non-college educated rural voters should quit complaining and simply get a degree, ideally in coding, and join the knowledge economy. Such contempt for a large swath of America has resulted in the ongoing erosion of Democrat support among working class white and non-white voters. Joe Biden, more than any president in decades, has prioritized rural people with a remarkable set of pro-worker policies and major investments in rural economies and infrastructure. We believe that this record offers a foundation for Democrats at all levels to begin to win back working-class rural voters while holding on to the party's multiracial urban and suburban base. So the claim here is that Joe Biden sent money in the direction of rural communities to pay friends of the government to make the improvements they saw fit to make. Is this the sort of thing that rural voters wanted and asked for? Is this what they were demanding when they went out and voted for Donald Trump? No, it's just the agenda being implemented a little further away from the city. As an aside, by the way, there was a headline yesterday that got a lot of attention in the Washington Times. Biden's $42.5 billion rural high-speed internet plan gets stuck in red tape, not a single home connected 3 years after enactment. My first thought upon reading this, of course, was, yeah, that's what Starlink is there to solve. I didn't realize this when I posted about it, but an account called Whole Mars Blog over on X, formerly Twitter, beat me to it. They said for $42 billion, they could have bought Starlink dishes for 140 million people. Elon Musk actually responded to that saying, wow, that's crazy. Surely some people should lose their jobs over this. If wasting billions isn't enough, what does it take? And that's a very good question. There are rural areas all across this country that still don't have access to high-speed internet, at least not on the old system, and the government hasn't solved that problem for them. Why don't they solve that problem for them? Well, you wouldn't want to incentivize people moving out to rural areas while you turn the cities into communist shitholes. So you make it impossible to live out there and earn a living in the digital economy. They're happy to send money for their pet projects out to rural communities, like, for instance, building vast fields of solar panels, which is supposed to be, I guess, saving the environment while it just destroys the pristine natural areas that remain. But that's not what people want. People want jobs they can do where if they work hard, they can have and raise a family and not be ripped off on things like property tax and not send their kids to public schools so they can be sexualized and brainwashed by communists and perverts. The Nation is essentially suggesting that the fake president's administration effectively purchased the votes of rural America. They did public projects in the places people like the government the least, and that's what's going to convince them to say, you know what? Maybe government's the solution after all. Give me a break. In 2022, the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative which The Nation co-founded, interviewed 50 Democrat candidates from 25 states who ran in rural districts between 2016 and 2020. Though they didn't all win office, they all significantly overperformed the partisan lean of their district or state. So the system is being implemented already. They were able to achieve better than expected results back in 2022. Remember, there was going to be a big wave because no one could stand the Democrats and everyone realized that the government was a shit show? Well, nope. Democrats made up all that ground out in the rural communities. So we've already had this run once. Our questions to those voters boiled down to, what was your secret sauce? From their answers, we identified several key ingredients. I love a food metaphor. First and foremost, successful candidates were highly attuned to the concerns of their would-be constituents. Instead of running on a cookie-cutter national Democrat platform, they focused on the things voters in their district cared about most. Kitchen table matters like jobs and the economy, alongside ultra-local problems such as lousy roads, underfunded hospitals, and spotty internet access. Overperforming candidates also eschewed Beltway political consultants in favor of campaign staffers rooted in the community. Oh, good. So they've identified and made inroads with Democrat activists in those communities. This, they say, made for authentic campaigns with local flavor. Former Maine Senator Chloe Max Min, for example, employed homemade yard signs that were a folksy departure from the typically soulless campaign placards that litter the landscape. And yes, that just got those rural voters so excited. They said, oh, look, that's low grade, like a poor person made it. We really identify with that. Democrats, that's who we're voting for. Rural overperformers did something else that's unpopular within the progressive left, but widely accepted by rural swing voters. They didn't demonize Trump, no matter how richly he deserved it. And they didn't try to scare or pressure persuadable voters into seeing the GOP or MAGA as an existential threat to democracy. Such rhetoric is music to the base's ears, but falls flat with key constituencies, most worryingly, youth and Latinos. Guillermo Lopez, a board member of the Hispanic Center Lehigh Valley in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, had this to say about Democrats hyping the MAGA threat to democracy. I actually think that harms the vote. The average person who puts their nose to the grindstone and goes to work, I don't think that motivates them. I think it scares them and freezes them. Now, I have no idea why they're quoting someone from a race-based Democrat activist center in a city of around 80,000 population, but I guess they just needed to make it feel real that someone might not hate Trump. We're with Lopez, says The Nation. Time spent enumerating and labeling Trump's voluminous misconduct is time that could have been spent connecting with voters on what they care about the most. We reserve judgment as to whether sounding the alarm about MAGA fascism appeals to disaffected or undecided urban and suburban voters, but we're reasonably confident that this message does little to help rural candidates. It's strange that these commies never can wrap their heads around the idea that if people aren't convinced by the things they've been saying for 9 straight years, it's probably because they're wrong. That might be different if they were some small, obscure minority who was censored and pushed to the margins of society, but they literally have all the institutions and levers of power operating in their favor. The superiority of depolarizing rhetoric is corroborated by a wide body of academic and poll-tested research documented in our full report. At the end of the day, rural Democrats able to chip away at Republican strongholds were the ones who knew how to meet voters where they already were, not where they wished they were at. I don't know what the at is for. This sounds like Politics 101. Actually, no, it just sounds like bad grammar. But it's a principle all too often cast aside by candidates and campaign consultants who spent too much time tuned in to MSNBC pundits and not enough listening to their own voters. Why would they listen to the voters? The entire point is to force voters to listen to them. Democrats running in this cycle should study the 2022 campaigns of Representatives Mary Peltola, who won in solidly red Alaska. Oh, Alaska. Is that the place where Lisa Murkowski kept her seat in the 2022 election over Kelly Tshibaka after installing ranked choice voting? Yes, it is. Oh, wow. He's glorifying the results of a stolen election. Isn't that amazing? Let's find some more. And Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who won Washington State's 3rd district, which had been in Republican hands for 6 terms. Yeah, you know, everybody in that area was just inspired by Joe Biden's bold leadership. Wait, who did Marie Gluesenkamp Perez run against? Oh, that's right. It was Joe Kent. So that was an operation. It's almost like a bright light was being shown on these races for a reason, even though the Republican pro-MAGA candidate didn't ultimately win. Now, was that a pro-Trump op to expose election fraud, or was it an anti-Trump op involving Kent and Tshibaka to support the narrative that MAGA candidates lost around the country? You can see how either side would have played that. They are holding up examples of stolen elections as proof that the Democrats have a path toward winning in rural communities. It's absolutely nuts. Gluesenkamp Perez won her 2022 race in large part because of her credibility as a co-owner of an auto repair shop and her laser-sharp focus on issues her constituents prioritized, like the quote-unquote right to repair, farming, and other equipment. While some on the left are angry that she doesn't toe the Democrat Party line on every issue, her record shows her to be the kind of left-leaning populist who can win in rural districts. The Democrat Party would be wise to embrace socially moderate, economically and stylistically populist candidates like Gluesenkamp Perez and Peltola as part of its coalition. So how about that? Even the far left is pushing moderation as a path toward winning elections in rural communities. It's time to abandon the principles, everybody. We got to make friends with those rednecks again. In the spirit of cross-racial populist solidarity, top-performing rural candidates put work and workers at the center of their policy and rhetoric, proposing a hand up rather than a handout. For the great majority of rural people, self-reliance, the wherewithal to solve our own problems and meet our own needs, is central to our identity. Oh, so I guess this commie is very rural. We don't know a single farmer, conservative or liberal, who doesn't feel this way. As Colby College rural political scholars, Nick Jacobs and Dan Shea put it, what rural residents want to hear is this: make it possible for us to improve our communities ourselves. And that's what you got to do. You got to tell them you're going to improve your community. And you're going to do that by allowing us to implement our agenda in your community. Those rednecks will never figure that out, at least according to Colby College's rural political scholars. Amazing that they have just invented new classes of experts to be able to have people to refer to as authorities to appeal to support this brand of wholly unbelievable bullshit. Rural residents might be disproportionately dependent on some form of government transfer payment, but they don't like it. Farrah Stockman, author of American Made: What Happens to People When Work Disappears, wrote, too often, those who champion the working class speak only of social safety nets, not the jobs that anchor a working person's identity. The key is in the delivery, ensuring that local communities can adapt and drive these investments rather than trying to implement ill-suited top-down mandates. It's amazing how many ways they are able to tell us that all of these people want Donald Trump. They essentially say, we understand that these people want all the things we're not, so the way we're going to solve that problem is by telling these morons that we're exactly the people they like. They didn't like us before because we were always inauthentic and insincere. We were just lying and pandering and trying to bribe them. I know what we should do. We should just become the people they say they want and then lie and pander and try to bribe them. A couple more paragraphs and we'll close this out. The Biden administration's aggressive antitrust actions combined with rule changes favoring workers and organized labor are critical steps in giving non-college educated working people agency. You see that? If you haven't gone to college and you have a job, what you lack is agency. You can't make your own decisions. You're just not prepared. So their next sentence is, the Biden administration's investments in rural infrastructure and manufacturing are essential as well. You see, problem solved. Likewise, the Biden campaign's decision to hire a rural coordinator bodes well. But that coordinator's efficacy will be orders of magnitude greater if they hire a small army of locally rooted staff who knew how to make a national campaign relevant and resonant for rural voters. While Democrats will not win rural America, win is in quotes, in 2024, they can and must run up the margins with rural voters. I don't know what that can mean if you're not winning, but okay. A third of whom are considered persuadable if they are to keep the presidency and control Congress and state houses. Because it turns out the secret sauce isn't that complicated. Find out what's most important to persuadable rural people and focus on that. That's the only recipe worth cooking. Oh, they called back the food metaphor. Nailed it, buddy. What a piece of writing. By the way, that was actually two writers, a man and a woman. They are the co-founders of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative that they cite in the article. Erica Edelson was also the author of Beyond Contempt, How Liberals Can Communicate Across the Great Divide. So she's been trying to figure out how the people like her will be better able to trick the people they hate. While her partner, Anthony Flacavento, is an organic farmer and rural development consultant. So these people are trying to figure out how to bring the city out to rural communities. I bet those rural communities can't wait. And so, as I said, back in May, I was a few days late on reading this, but when I finally posted it on May 23rd, I said, this narrative will be pushed to explain how they stole down ballot races in unexpected places. Going to be a lot of small town election workers and election officials buying new cars this fall. And what I had in mind was something very much like the Mark Zuckerberg Center for Tech and Civic Life initiatives that had such great impact in 2020. They took $500 million and flooded it into the hands of local politicians and activists all across the country. It was all done under the guise of preparing the election process for the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything from sponsoring the Mark Zuckerberg drop boxes, where the ballot harvesting schemes were run, to paying for election judges. The money came with clawback provisions. If the desired results weren't achieved, the money would be taken back. All you have to do is refocus that program. It sounds like they did it in 2022. They pointed to two races that were spotlighted very brightly throughout that 2022 campaign. It was obviously that way for a reason. And now they're describing all of these ways that they might win, all of these potential justifications for how Democrats could reach rural voters and make a difference in those places. And they even noted hiring an army of local activists to lead the projects. Again, sounds like a whole lot of rural election workers this fall are going to be driving new cars and trucks. And think about how this would work. Rather than having extraordinary margins in urban communities, they would want to disperse a given number of votes throughout the rest of the state. If you can create an extra 10 or 20 votes at rural precincts all around a state, you might offset the need for a chunk of 10,000 in one of the cities. It also may well allow you to seize control over local governments that may then be able to halt implementation of certain programs or find other ways to subvert a Donald Trump presidency. They may be able to steal certain congressional seats just on this strategy alone, and it may impact Senate races and the race for president. It's possible they may perceive rural communities as soft spots where the RNC will not be looking. In fact, who knows? They could have a deal with the RNC not to be looking. And I hope things have changed under Laura Trump and I guess Michael Whatley. But I can just as easily imagine Laura Trump there as kind of a mole to monitor the RNC's internal operations and the corruption within that system. There's no reason to trust any of this. And that is not, by the way, a Laura Trump problem. It's an RNC problem. So that was 4 weeks ago. Let's snap back to the present. This is from yesterday in the evening. Fox News poll, 3-point shift in Biden-Trump matchup since May. President Biden is the front runner in a hypothetical matchup against former President Trump for the first time since October, as positive views of the economy inch up, hitting their highest level thus far in the Biden presidency, according to a new Fox News national survey. You got that? So you're being told that your fellow Americans have decided that this economy is better than any point in the last 3.5 years, which means they are feeling like they're ready to re-elect the fake president who was never elected in the first place. Since May, there was a 3-point change in the presidential race. Trump was ahead by 1 point last month, while Biden is up by 2 points today, 50-48. That's well within the margin of error. Just got to say that. It's well within the margin of error. But it's worth noting that in order to care about the margin of error, you would have to pretend that the numbers themselves were real and properly compiled in the first place. And of course, they're not. This is nonsense. Beyond improved evaluations on the economy, a range of other events since the May survey could influence small shifts in vote preference, including Trump's hush money conviction, Hunter Biden's gun trial conviction, a positive U.S. jobs report, and Biden's immigration executive order. And again, that was not an executive order. It was a presidential proclamation. It has no power whatsoever and has accomplished absolutely nothing. Biden's current 50% support is his best this cycle. He hasn't been ahead of Trump since October 2023, and that was just by 1 point at 49-48. So we've discussed polling plenty of times and the problems with polling. It can be hard to reach a representative sample of people. Questions are asked in a certain manner to yield certain answers. People who are answering pollers get badgered by the pollster. And over the past few years, there have been social incentives to answer in a certain way when certain questions are asked. But that's just the beginning. Polls check their accuracy against election results. When the election results are fake, then the polls being accurate is meaningless. And when polls are weighted to reflect party affiliation checked against election results, we have another problem. And there are numerous other problems with the data. Polls are a quasi or pseudo-scientific mathematic way to substantiate narrative deployments. But with that said, this one still gets a little weird. It says specifically in the article reporting about this poll yesterday that Trump does well with rural voters, leading by 17 points, 57-40. But then Fox News posted a graphic on television this morning that says Fox News poll and lists choice for president between Biden and Trump, showing Biden with a 2-point lead over Donald Trump among rural voters, 50-48. And as you might imagine, that went around the internet pretty quickly. And I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but it is very interesting to see that same hit come back around a month later, right as the rural internet conversation is happening that Elon Musk is highlighting. Now, I understand that it is absolutely possible that someone at Fox News might have just typed the numbers in the wrong way when they were producing that graphic. But this is generating a conversation about whether or not rural voters would support Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And in addition to that, it's serving as a great shame campaign against Donald Trump. In the live stream yesterday, one of the people who asked a question asked about when I thought the mainstream media would end and why it had been predicted that the media would be the last to go. And I suggested that it's possible it just has to be the sort of thing that happens naturally over time as people lose their faith and interest in the stories the media is telling. And that for whatever reason, people just can't let go of the TV characters that they feel for some reason are like their friends, despite the fact that they are constantly lying to all of us and millions of other people all the time. Everyone holds out hope that their favorite TV characters will be the ones that finally wake up the normies, and then we can all celebrate. And this week we can see that some of that is being propelled by Donald Trump himself. He just did a rally in Racine, Wisconsin, which is basically Paul Ryan's backyard. At that rally, Trump talked about how he would preserve Medicare for the people who have paid into it, as he often does. And he remarked that the people trying to take down Medicare were wheeling Granny off the cliff. Now, you might remember back to the 2012 campaign. That was a commercial by Democrats. Paul Ryan, with his budget, Paul was the fiscal conservative. He wanted to kill Medicare and was portrayed as pushing a grandmother off a cliff in a wheelchair. So Trump drops that comment at a rally in Wisconsin. Now, Paul Ryan is on the board of Fox News. And of course, Paul Ryan's not shy about his public anti-Trump stance. So people have been going after Paul Ryan all week, and that reached a fever pitch after the Fox News poll came out. Trump responded in a series of Truth Social posts. Yesterday, he said, "Nobody can ever trust Fox News, and I am one of them, with the weak and ineffective rhino Paul Ryan on its board of directors. He's a total lightweight, a failed and pathetic Speaker of the House, and a very disloyal person. Romney was bad, but Paul Ryan made him look worse. As a team, they never had a chance. Rupert and Lachlan, get that dog off your board. You don't need him. All you need is Trump. Make America great again." He went on. "Fox News polls are always the worst for me. They have been from the beginning and always will be." And then this morning, he went at it again. "The latest Fox News poll is trash. They used a biased, Democrat-leaning sample of voters, polling more Biden 2020 voters than Trump 2020 voters to skew the results in favor of Crooked Joe. I am leading big in virtually every other poll, including in all of the key battleground states, like Wisconsin, where I just held a massive rally, and Pennsylvania, where I will be on Saturday. Also, the number one issue in this country is not protecting democracy. It is inflation and immigration. If it is protecting democracy, Trump is your best choice, because Crooked Joe Biden is the greatest threat to democracy in history, with his open border and weaponization of our justice system against his political opponent, me. Fox News polls have never treated me or MAGA fairly. Don't worry, we will win. Fox News should get rid of Paul Ryan and get a new pollster, but they won't. Real Clear Politics just came out and has me leading by a lot, especially in all the important swing states. My best numbers yet, despite the Biden weaponization of justice." So Trump is coming out hard against this poll. That always indicates the manipulation of polling. These are just fake news polls. They can make the numbers say what they want them to say, with a variety of ways to create the numbers. He's going after Fox News, and he's going after Paul Ryan. And so Paul Ryan is back in the spotlight. And here's Morning Joe signaling his support for Paul Ryan. Mika Brzezinski's husband, you might remember, used to be a Republican congressman from Florida until one of his staffers died. But it's a conspiracy theory to say that it was by Joe Scarborough's own hand. And Zbigniew Brzezinski's daughter would have never married a murderer.
He worked for a group of us when I first got to Washington, and I love the guy. I really do. I mean, he's a wonderful guy, a wonderful man. And I'm so glad he's speaking out. I think he's on the Fox board or the News Corp board. He's on one of the boards. So he's in a position of authority over there, and that's not something a lot of people would do. Just to speak out like that. So I appreciate that. I will say the thing I don't understand is understanding that this guy's an authoritarian, understanding the dangers that he presents, and then saying, well, I can't stand Joe Biden either, and I'm going to vote for, I hate his policies, I'm going to just write in a vote. Well, if you feel like democracy's on the line, if you feel there's an authoritarian waiting, really what is so offensive about voting for a man who's presided over the strongest economy in the world, an economy that the World Bank yesterday said is fueling the world's economy. The Dow's at over 40,000. We've never been stronger economically relative to the rest of the world since 1945. Our military's relative to the rest of the world never been stronger than it is today either. I'm grateful that Republicans like Paul Ryan are not voting for Donald Trump. Actually proving they actually believe what they've been saying their whole life. And that will be enough to defeat Donald Trump. I just wonder how you can say he's an authoritarian, he's a threat to American democracy, he doesn't have the character to be president, but I'm not going to vote against the one guy, but I'm not going to vote for the one guy that can keep him out of office.
Okay, so that's Morning Joe. Let's get the counter argument from Steve Bannon. And this leads in with a clip of Paul Ryan appearing on Fox News this week.
Donald Trump, you had said, though, that would not be the case with you. You had said that he's a populist and an authoritarian narcissist, that character is too important to me, and it's a job that requires the kind of character he just doesn't have. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. I agree with that. I don't support Biden either. I think his policies are terrible. I hate the fact that I feel like I got to write in a Republican like I did the last time in 2020. I voted for him in 2016, hoping that there was going to be a different kind of person in office. And I do think character is a really important issue. If you put yourself above the Constitution, as he has done.
But what happened?
I think that makes you unfit for office.
Was the whole January 6th thing?
That's a part of it. I think it's a contribution of factors, but I think it really is just character at the end of the day. And the fact that if you're willing to put yourself above the Constitution, an oath you swear when you take office, in federal office, whether it's president or a member of Congress, you swear an oath to the Constitution. And if you're willing to suborn it to yourself, I think that makes you unfit for office.
Not to himself. He was defending the Republic and defending the Constitution. We don't care if you vote Republican. We don't care. If you watch Fox News, you're supporting this. Why is he on the board of directors of a publicly traded company? Please tell me, in the history of Wall Street and fiduciary responsibility, has any board member ever come out and trashed a nominee of a party that they're supposedly a center-right news network? They're not center-right. That is old politics.
Later in the clip, Bannon actually jokes around a bit about Paul Ryan's relevance and some sort of potential comeback as part of a Ron DeSantis Paul Ryan ticket. That would be hysterical. Then Bannon goes off again, and this one is a barn burner.
How it's going to turn out. And it could go the other way on you. That's character in the defining moment. In the defining moment of his political life, every time there's a crisis, he runs. And you're going to have him sit there and lecture us about the character of a man who went back to Mar-a-Lago when he could have retired, and he turned around understanding he was going to go to prison and they were going to bankrupt him and they were going to do everything to him. And he said, hell no, I'm coming back to fight for that republic. Well, that's a guy I will stand with. And the Murdochs are disgusting. And if you watch Fox, you're supporting it. Why is he not off the board of directors? Why is he there? To mock one of the greatest Americans in the history of this country.
Now, you can say it's all kayfabe. Maybe it is. It's always worth considering for any of these key players, most particularly Fox News, by the way. They made the call in Arizona on November 3rd of 2020. They, quote unquote, fired Tucker Carlson. They settled with Dominion, even though they had evidence that Dominion knew its machines couldn't produce a reliable outcome and were wide open and vulnerable to manipulation. And now they have Paul Ryan on the board, while his pal Kevin McCarthy has been supporting a man named John McGuire in Virginia who just ran in a Republican primary race this week against Bob Good. And the outcome of that election is still undecided days later. They're separated by a few hundred votes. Bob Good is the leader of the Freedom Caucus in the House. They are supposedly the pro-MAGA people. Should we believe that if Trump is coming out and endorsing the opponent of Bob Good? Today, some audio was released. It's a little bit hard to hear. I'll play it for you, but it's not going to be the best listen. I'll go through it after that.
Makes, I thought, you know what, I can't sit by and watch and then regret that we nominated Trump, and we may well do it. And then as the prosecutions and the courts, I'm fearful as he carries that baggage, because there's going to be some parts of our play who won't vote for Trump. But as the convictions, as the charges mount, I'm fearful on ability to win, and I want 8 years. You're asking me privately. I don't say this.
So Bob Good was saying that he was nervous about the party nominating Trump. With all of the legal issues swirling around, he was concerned about all of that baggage. That was captured with a hidden camera, so Bob Good did not know he was being recorded. Somehow that video made its way to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that was released, and people are asserting that that is the reason why Trump endorsed Bob Good's opponent. Bob Good also happened to endorse and support Ron DeSantis. And on a surface level interpretation, assuming that all of this is real and naturally occurring, it's all organic and not part of some operation, that would be ample reason to believe that Bob Good, as the leader of the Freedom Caucus, is kind of just presenting a false face. That's not really who Bob Good is, as proven by his DeSantis endorsement and this video. But then again, Steve Bannon, who can't stand Paul Ryan or Kevin McCarthy, is supporting Bob Good because Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan are supporting his opponent. The New York Times, in their article today on the race in Virginia, described Good and McGuire, saying there was scant difference on the issues between the two hard-right candidates, both America First isolationists who want to crack down at the southern border, block aid to Ukraine, and shrink government spending. The contest between two election deniers, which has turned ugly and personal, was potentially headed for a recount that could drag on for weeks. With more than 95% of the votes counted, John McGuire, a little-known state senator and former Navy SEAL, who attended the Stop the Steal rally outside the White House on January 6, 2021, had a lead over Good of a little more than 300 votes, according to the Associated Press. Mail-in votes were still being counted, and Mr. Good said he could still prevail. But that did not stop McGuire, who has pitched himself to voters as the true Trump loyalist and criticized Mr. Good for his vote to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, from declaring victory on Tuesday night before the final votes were counted. Virginia does not have a requirement for an automatic recount, but if the winner is ahead by less than 1%, either candidate can request one. It was a rare instance in which both candidates in a photo finish race had promoted the lie that Mr. Trump won the 2020 presidential election, raising questions about whether either would accept an adverse outcome in his own contest. The law provides a process for evaluating the accuracy of all vote totals from Election Day to ensure everyone can have full confidence in the certified results, Mr. Good wrote on social media. Provisional ballots and mail-in ballots are also still to be counted. We are asking for full transparency from the officials involved and patience from the people of the 5th District over the coming weeks as the certification of results is completed. The state of play raised resting heart rates among Mr. McGuire's powerful supporters, who had been projecting confidence about a decisive double-digit victory and assuring Mr. Trump of such an outcome. Mr. Trump's endorsement proved powerful enough to propel the little-known state senator to a virtual tie with the well-known incumbent, but it also demonstrated the limits of the former president's power as his support failed to clinch a decisive win for McGuire. The article talks about how McCarthy pushed for Trump's endorsement and says Mr. Good's cardinal sin in Mr. Trump's eyes was backing Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida for president last year. He later endorsed the former president and plastered Mr. Trump's name and letters as big as his own on campaign lawn signs, despite a cease and desist letter from the Trump campaign asking him to stop. Mr. Trump told voters that Mr. Good would, quote, stab you in the back like he did me and urge them to vote against Bob Good. Mr. Good was also a top target for McCarthy, who has been on a revenge tour against him and 7 other Republicans who voted to oust him from the speakership last year. And so we have an unresolvable primary election in Virginia that is starting to move into the national spotlight. Mainstream media can sell this as Republicans having all sorts of internal problems, but the upshot is that it's the election system that will be to blame for those problems. So hopefully we'll get to see that process play out in a very public manner that wakes Virginia voters up to the fact that their elections are rigged and stolen. But let's come back to the rural broadband issue I mentioned before. This is the article from the Washington Times on Tuesday. Americans still waiting on Biden broadband plan, rural high-speed internet stuck in Dems' red tape. Residents in rural America are eager to access high-speed internet under a $42.5 billion federal modernization program. But not a single home or business has been connected to new broadband networks nearly 3 years after President Biden signed the funding into law, and no project will break ground until sometime next year. Lawmakers and internet companies blame the slow rollout on burdensome requirements for obtaining the funds, including climate change mandates, preference for hiring union workers, and the requirement that eligible companies prioritize the employment of quote-unquote justice-impacted people with criminal records to install broadband equipment. So they want people with criminal records to do the broadband installations. That's what we're being told. And all of this seems like an op happening in all directions. Everything we've talked about today, just op. The Commerce Department, which is distributing the funds under the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, is also attempting to regulate consumer rates, lawmakers say. This puts them at odds with internet providers and congressional Republicans who say the law prohibits such regulation. The slow pace of the funding allocation and compliance will push the project start dates for modernizing rural internet access to 2025 and 2026, according to a timeline officials outlined in a House budget hearing. Federal Communications Commissioner Brendan Carr said the program's goal of providing high-speed internet to the most underserved areas will not be fully realized until 2030, 9 years after its enactment. Rural areas have been waiting a long time for broadband service. Many rely on slow internet that travels over copper lines and are unable to transmit large amounts of data. Some areas have no internet at all. And so then they get into some of the nitty-gritty details and the commentary, but I'm going to skip that. If you would like to read it, be my guest. But let's consider what we're being told here. Joe Biden, the fake president, put aside $42.5 billion to bring internet to rural communities. And over the last few years, we've seen the launch and the proliferation, the growth of Starlink. Starlink happens to be the best possible internet service you can get in rural areas that don't yet have broadband. And that is exactly what is happening. Now, the equipment for Starlink has been rather expensive. It's $600 for the equipment and then $120 a month, but it also works. And options in rural communities are very limited. As the article said, there are places that don't have access to high-speed internet at all. And, people can get HughesNet and have essentially dial-up speeds or other types of cellular internet, but it's slow and unreliable, and there are data caps, but it's just not really practical, especially if you need the internet for your work and you want to be able to do that work while living and or working in a rural community. So that money the very real President Joe Biden set aside to bring internet to rural communities, the ground still hasn't been broken because all of these Democrat priorities, DEI priorities, climate change mandates, union workers, justice-impacted people, Democrats have made it impossible to get this work started. They haven't even broken ground on it. It's not going to happen till next year. But then again, next year, it might just start working magically. Like all of a sudden, it's just working. It goes from not even having the ground broken, all of these silly Democrat priorities, to all of a sudden, you just have broadband, high-speed internet coming down straight from the sky. How does it happen? Well, I don't know. I think it's because Elon Musk is putting satellites up there. And he happens to be the number one recipient of Defense Department contracts. And he's got this company called SpaceX. They launch rockets that carry satellites into quote-unquote orbit. And those satellites can transmit energy and data directly to your device with the intent of eventually enabling peer-to-peer communications. It bounces from my phone or computer up to the satellite and down to your phone or computer. An entirely new and entirely parallel comms and energy transmission infrastructure. Now, let's just say, for instance, he's building one of those, and of course, he is. We can see it already being built. In fact, you can already get Starlink in rural areas. And I'm not a salesman for Starlink or anything. They don't have those. But it's actually even cheaper for rural customers. You can get it for as low as $300. And they just keep blasting more satellites up into the sky all the time, enabling more and more rural customers to get high-speed broadband internet access without any need for ground being broken to install the old system for these customers. They're just going to get the new system. That's what modernizing is. And we will close with this. This is from June 11th, so 9 days ago. This is from spacenews.com. And no, I'm not going to read some article about the vast, bleak, infinite void. Although, gotta say, there was one this week that talked about a black hole that was awakening, and it was the size of 1 million suns. You know how scientists know this? They observed changes in light from 300 million miles away. And I don't want to spend any time on this, but apparently we are now being told that there are 2 astronauts who went to the International Space Station and now they are stuck in space or something. So maybe that will capture the nation's attention. But to space news, Pentagon embracing SpaceX's Starshield for future military SATCOM. So we're not going to talk about outer space here, despite the fact that this article does appear in spacenews.com. There is other space. There's space up there in the sky. There's cyberspace. Space can mean things besides that vast, bleak, infinite void. In a stark illustration of how rapidly the satellite communications landscape is shifting toward large constellations of smaller satellites in low Earth orbit, the Defense Department plans to add more than 100 of SpaceX's Starshield satellites to its future SATCOM architecture. Starshield is a militarized version of SpaceX's Starlink internet satellites with enhanced encryption and other security features. And unlike Starlink, which is a commercial service, the Starshield satellites would be owned and controlled by the U.S. government. Gosh, I hope they'd be protected by Space Force. Colonel Eric Felt, Director of Space Architecture at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration, said the plan is to acquire a constellation of Starshield satellites by 2029, contingent upon receiving the necessary funding appropriations from Congress. He noted that the military has been an avid consumer of SpaceX's commercial Starlink services, but also wants to take advantage of the company's dedicated Starshield product line and procure a government-owned constellation. In a briefing slide presented at the conference titled SATCOM 2029, Felt showed the DoD's notional future SATCOM architecture, including more than 100 Starshield satellites. For non-specialized personnel operating in remote environments, user-friendly Starlink terminals have opened up connectivity in ways previously unimaginable. While thrilled by Starlink's capabilities for U.S. forces, Felt cited concerns about the cybersecurity of satellite systems writ large, which led to the current plan to procure Starshield satellites. A key advantage of the Starshield architecture is its proliferated nature, with a large number of relatively small satellites able to provide global communications coverage. This design offers significant resiliency compared to the traditional paradigm of a few large geostationary satellites that are expected to be targeted by enemies in a conflict. Felt said DoD wants to diversify its LEO architecture, that's low Earth orbit, not just by adding more Starshield satellites, but also new commercial services that have yet to enter the market, like Amazon's Project Kuiper. We still have to figure out how we best embrace PLEO, said Felt. Do we buy it as a service? Do we double down on the Starshield government-owned architecture? There's various ways that we can embrace proliferated LEO, but it's absolutely essential that we do. The demand for SpaceX's satellite internet service has grown significantly across DoD, according to Claire Hopper, head of the Space Force's Commercial Satellite Communications Office. We are burning through our procurement contract ceiling really quickly, Hopper said, referring to the $900 million 10-year IDIQ agreement for proliferated LEO services her office and the Defense Information Systems Agency established just a year ago, with 20 vendors, including SpaceX. In fact, by this time next year, we expect $500 million of that ceiling to be consumed, she said at the MilSatCom USA conference. So we are working with DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, right now to increase that ceiling well into the billions. We do view this contract as being a workhorse, and the demand for it is off the charts. The satellite internet service Hopper's office procures today from SpaceX is currently branded as Starshield, although it utilizes SpaceX's commercial Starlink satellite constellation and not a dedicated military Starshield system. All of our users are on the commercial Starlink constellation, Hopper explained. DoD has, quote, unique service plans that contain privileged capabilities and features that are not available commercially. She noted that the flat panel user terminals that CSCO purchases from SpaceX are designed to be compatible with commercial Starlink and government-owned Starshield satellites. The terminal is capable of roaming on the Starlink and Starshield constellation, Hopper said. Hopper said DoD users today don't have access to Starshield satellites, which are owned by another government agency, but did not specify which one. According to several sources, the details of DoD's procurement of Starshield communication satellites have yet to be worked out after funding is approved. SpaceX is supplying Starshield satellites with imaging payloads to the National Reconnaissance Office for a proliferated LEO constellation of surveillance satellites. DoD's Starshield satellites would be for communications, not for imaging. A National Reconnaissance Office spokesperson said in a statement the agency, quote, does not discuss the companies associated with the building of our systems or our contractual relationships with them. The NRO is an intelligence agency, but also a defense agency that reports to the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. So Elon Musk is the largest recipient of Defense Department contracts, and the Defense Department is going to be working on the same infrastructure that Elon Musk's companies, or the companies Elon Musk is the face of, are setting up in the sky. There is the version available to you that the DoD sometimes uses, and then they have their own version that is separate but very similar to the version available to you. Now, again, there's an announcement of Starlink satellites being sent up into the sky pretty regularly. They're averaging more than a launch per week in 2024, and there are thousands of satellites up there. You can assume they're going to keep doing that, and every time they do, the coverage expands and improves. They're about to launch a version 2. So what's more likely? The fake president's $42.5 billion going to shovels in the ground projects to finally bring high-speed broadband internet access to rural communities, or to the Starlink array being fully built out to the point where it can cover everyone considering it's already available to rural communities. Sounds to me like that money's just been repurposed. And of course, Joe Biden is not a real president in the first place. So that's a lot of hits on rural America this week and what their needs are. It's actually being talked about, which is awfully impressive. And the Uniparty, the Democrats in particular, the Uniparty left, are trying to stake some claim on rural voters. But that's not going to happen. Just because people live in small towns, it doesn't mean that they're idiots and don't know about the rest of the world. They're certainly not crazy enough to go out and re-elect a man who was never elected in the first place. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's happening!